Do you need some help?
No, I'm good.
What are you doing?
I'm trying to figure out how to get over this garden wall. Or fence.
Why exactly?
Because I just finished watching the Queen Charlotte series and it made me sad. And now I have to read the book.
What book are we discussing?
Queen Charlotte by Julia Quinn and Shonda Rhimes. Now, can you just help a gal out? Come on. Help me climb this fence.
You don't think people aren't going to notice if you don't do the vlog that they voted for, that you promised to do?
Just help me.
I refuse to help a booktuber climb over a fence so that she won't have to read a book about me. Hello, I'm George.
Hello, I'm Bee, and welcome to my channel, Mom Needs True Romance. Hello, and welcome to my vlog for Queen Charlotte. This is not to be confused with my vlog for the Queen Charlotte show, which I will link right here in case you want to see it. I'm actually probably going to be referencing the show quite a bit while I read the book since I just finished watching the show yesterday, and yes, there will be spoilers. So let's do this. It is a gorgeous day, so I'm excited to do this outside. The cover, by the way, of this book is beautiful. And I just love it so much. I probably need to buy a physical copy for more than one reason. One, it's beautiful. Two, oh no, my daughter knows I'm out here. Oops. She's supposed to be playing outside. I'm realizing it's going to be a little bit difficult for me to tell you where I am in the book. I'm listening to it, and I have 10 hours and 12 minutes left. I'm at the beginning of a chapter entitled Charlotte. Yes, the chapters do not have numbers. They just have names of characters who are narrating each chapter. And of course, there's many chapters. Oh, good, she's out front. There's many chapters with the same name. Okay, I'm gonna be right back. Hold on. So let's talk about the content, shall we? Again, as I said, I'm going to be referencing the show quite a bit, what I saw and didn't see in the show. Very interesting. I'm actually really glad that I watched it first and I'm now reading it because I'm getting extra info. If you read it first and then watched it, let me know because I'd love to know what your experience is like. I'm really curious to see what's the better way to do it. We learn about the history of George's family, why Augusta, it was not Queen Augusta, why she's Princess Augusta. Her husband, the prince, was actually killed by a cricket ball going into his chest before he ever became king. So the crown went straight from the grandfather to the grandson, George. She's talking to him early on about Charlotte coming and also the fact that she didn't realize Charlotte was going to be so brown. So that's the same as the show. Right away though, very early on, we are aware that George has bouts of things and we get a sense of what he's feeling. It's like his body is filled with words and all of a sudden they start coming out of his mouth. He also blacks out and comes to later, so he's not aware of what he's thinking, feeling, doing while he's having these episodes, like the worst parts of the episode. So very interesting to learn that. You don't know that at all from watching the show. And also you don't know it until like the second half of the show that even stuff like that's happening. So we also get the inside scoop on Agatha Danbury. We find out that the reason her husband chose to be betrothed to a 3-year-old, which was Agatha back in the day, was because he could enjoy 14 more years of bachelorhood, which he was really looking forward to. And Agatha believes that he's got children strewn all across Europe because he was all over the place. So really doesn't like him. That is quite evident in the way that she feels because some of this is told from her perspective. So again, interesting side notes on Agatha Danbury and her origin story. Here's another huge difference. We're doing Charlotte's wedding. Princess Augusta at the wedding, before the bride walks down the aisle, goes straight to Agatha Danbury and her husband and tells them that they are going to be Lord and Lady Danbury. What? I don't think that happened in the show. I feel like that would have been really dramatic. That would have been a really neat thing to have in the show, but no, it happens at the wedding, straight from Princess Augusta's lips. How awesome. She also bestows this honor to Lord Smythe Smith. He was not a lord before then. As you may remember, the Smythe Smith Quartet. Those are other books by Julia Quinn, so we see those characters. I've also seen those characters in one of Eloisa James's books, Once Upon a Tower. So it's kind of cool. Here we are seeing Smythe Smith characters in yet another book. How awesome is that? Additionally, we learn even more about Agatha. She's from Sierra Leone. One of her names is Aminata. Aminata means honest, trustworthy, and faithful. And in this conversation, you get the sense that absolutely Princess Augusta wants to join forces with Lady Danbury. So kind of cool how they did that. Also loved getting a chapter told from Brimsley's perspective. I got the sense that he really knew what he was doing in the show. He does not. He's brand new at this, just like Charlotte is. His first name is Bartholomew. And we find out that he sometimes likes Reynolds, but he sometimes doesn't. So their love affair hasn't started yet, which was interesting. It was also nice to know Reynolds' name from the beginning of the story. Reynolds is still very much an amazing man, and he actually witnesses George getting slapped by Dr. Monroe and goes to save him. And George says, no, it's fine. And you hear from George's perspective just how much the slap and the voice of Dr. Monroe helped him. So still don't like him based on the show, of course. But the way that they meet in the garden, George and Charlotte, it was still so romantic. I loved it. And in this way, I've loved the show more because I really loved the way George looked at Charlotte and the way they interacted. And it doesn't quite convey with one woman narrator. So far, mostly I'm really loving the book more than the show because I'm getting so much inside info and seeing so many different characters' perspectives and not being left in the dark about certain things. But in terms of the chemistry between Charlotte and George, show all the way. Better. We close out the portion that I've read so far today with they've had the lovely wedding. George is eager to give Charlotte her gift, which is of course her own house, because he's worried about disappointing her and being with her. So he's hopeful that she's going to enjoy her gift. Spoiler alert, she's not. Let's get to that next part, shall we? It is Mother's Day weekend, and I have been allowed to go out and go to my favorite used bookstore. I'm so excited. I haven't been in a while, so I'm going to browse and I might film a smidge of it. It is Saturday, so I don't think filming is going to be much of an option, but I'll pop a little bit in this vlog. I'm excited. But I have gotten a chance to listen to more of Queen Charlotte, obviously. I've gotten to 8 hours and 4 minutes left. I'm just starting a chapter called Charlotte. Again, I'm sorry that I don't have page numbers for you. I don't have chapter numbers for you, but that's not how this book is done, so I apologize. The wedding night has come to an end. George is dropping off Charlotte at her new home, Buckingham House, which it didn't occur to me is Buckingham Palace today. So this was the beginning of Buckingham Palace, which is pretty cool. So George drops her off. She's really unhappy, and he was kind at first and excited, and then he's like, no, I'm doing this, I'm leaving, and I'm the king. And she's like, I'm sorry, I thought you were just George. Again, the dialogue is word for word the same in the book as it is in the show, which is pretty neat. Because we're jumping around from character to character, and it's third person omniscient, as in the story is being told from different perspectives, but it's always the pronouns like she or he, as in the narrator is someone else. It's funny, the narrator is a little sarcastic too, because at one point Charlotte goes, it's not about the food, and then the narrator goes on to say, even though she just did say it was about the food. So it's kind of funny to have this extra kind of voice going on in the story that's basically the author talking, which I thought was funny. But we get to learn more about Brimsley. He is very new to his job. He's as new at this as Charlotte is. I thought that he was more worldly in terms of like royal expectations, but he's trying to deny his infatuation with Reynolds. They have been intimate in the past, but he thinks of Reynolds as kind of arrogant. But let me tell you something, so is Brimsley. He's described as having a fish face and being super short. And he was sick of everybody in the palace, all the staff looking down their nose at him. So now he looks down his nose at them. I'm like, okay, this guy's a little more sassy than I thought. Princess Augusta has Reynolds and Brimsley talk to her, and they give her no information about how it's going. Just like in the show, they're not giving her any intel. So she realizes she does need to talk to Agatha, which of course she already set up at the wedding. George asks Dr. Monroe to help him and use the creepy, scary methods. In the book, there are more spooky, creepy, yucky animals in cages. And interestingly, George gave Charlotte a Pomeranian as a gift, and it's the Pomeranian that he stole from one of the cages. In the book, it's interesting, Dr. Monroe says, I only got that dog 2 weeks ago and it's missing now, and I didn't even get to do any experiments on it yet. Oh no. Yikes. That is a whole other level of awful. I already didn't like this doctor, and now I really, 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 really dislike him. So yeah, wow. Glad we got that Pomeranian, which is named Pom Pom, by the way, out of there. Reynolds continues to try to be the voice of reason, but George is listening to Monroe because he really wants things to go well. Let's get back to Charlotte, though. She confides in Agatha. The scene where Agatha explains consummation to Charlotte is a lot more detailed than it is in the show. Charlotte doesn't even know male anatomy. And of course, poor Brimsley is forced to stand right there, and they continue to try to get him to participate in the conversation. It is very awkward / hilarious. Something else huge happens that did not happen in the show. So we do know that Agatha is trying to get Augusta to grant Agatha favors in return for information. This happened in the show. This happened in the book as well. What I don't remember from the show, and correct me if I'm wrong, in the book, Agatha tells Augusta the marriage has not been consummated. I was like, come on, Agatha. She is a master manipulator, this woman. So I'm curious to see what she's like in the Bridgerton series. At the end, thankfully, Reynolds helps convince George to leave Monroe and Q and head to Buckingham House with Charlotte, and he is about to convince her that he can be good enough to be with her. So looking forward to that. And now to look at books. I currently have 6 hours and 9 minutes left in the book, and this was the spicy portion. They have their wedding night after he comes back to Buckingham House. And I'll tell you, the way that they did it in the show was much better. The show was beautiful. It was intimate. It was just gorgeous. Really well done. The music, everything. Obviously, there's no music in the book, but also it was very kind of awkward and procedural. Very underwhelming. However, their second time was extremely spicy. So they have their beautiful night. Charlotte is thrilled, and then the next morning she wakes up to seeing Princess Augusta, who has come to visit her, talk to George about his duties, and she, Charlotte overhears and misunderstands that she thinks George is just faking everything. So she then basically cuts him out. She talks to him as little as possible. She gives him the cold shoulder. Unfortunately, he assumes this is because she can somehow see his heart and his mind and deems him to be unacceptable because he's not good enough. Of course, this is his own insecurities talking. He's so worried about whether or not he's fit to be king, whether he's fit to be husband. So he calls Monroe in and he says, please keep working on me again. And it's terrible. Lots of time is spent again with the torture. Not my favorite. Not fun at all. He then comes to her for comfort and they decide on even days. They don't like each other. There's a lot of passion there. This is where the scenes get spicier. There's the one in the dining room where they are so mad at each other and everybody has to run out in time so they don't have to see anything. But there's also a very well written love scene on the night that they first decided to do even days, just to get their duties out of the way and conceive an heir. But I thought that was very well written. I was wondering, because this was my first Julia Quinn, and I thought, is this how the love scenes are? Because they're not that great. Anyway, but no, it did get better. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Spicy scenes, torture, Charlotte and George not getting along, Brimsley and Reynolds, they're so cute together. And I love how Reynolds reassures Brimsley that there's no one else when Brimsley encounters Reynolds below stairs. They're about to have the coronation, and so George is really nervous. So speaking of Brimsley is not nearly as likable in the book as he is on the show. By the way, I don't think I've addressed this. There are no flash forwards in time in the book. In the show, we're seeing a lot of the same actors who played the characters in the Bridgerton series. The older Agatha, the older Violet, who is not even mentioned so far in this book. And of course, older Charlotte and older Brimsley. Reynolds is nowhere to be found in the future, unfortunately. But there are no flash forwards in time in this book. So that is another big difference between the book and the series. Looking forward to seeing the coronation next. So my boys are in occupational and speech therapy right now, so I'm taking some time to tell you about the next portion of Queen Charlotte. So, Charlotte, George, they're not getting along, except when they are, and when they're really getting along. They even seem a little bit happy about it, although they don't share a bed. It's not until Brimsley sees George, right before the coronation, getting looked at by Monroe, he realizes something's up. He mentions the doctor by accident to Charlotte. By the way, the coronation is not really touched on much at all, other than we know that it happened. I really like the coronation scenes in the show. In any case, Charlotte confronts George and says, what's going on with the doctor? So George explains just how much pressure he's always been under. The two of them have a heart-to-heart. They come out of it on the other side saying, you know what, there's not going to be even days and odd days anymore. There's just going to be days. I love that, and I love it when George says there's just days. So beautiful. Meanwhile, we've got Agatha, again, the master manipulator. She realizes that she's in charge of the great experiment, taking the people that are considered brown in this book and giving them titles and land and all of that. So right now, the great experiment is very much at risk because Charlotte has not produced an heir. Agatha has been on her about that, as we know. Now Agatha realizes that she needs to move and shake some things up to get what she wants. So she tells Charlotte to really start thinking about her people and the country as a whole, to think as a queen, not as some lovesick girl. She is the queen. Agatha decides she is the one who's solely responsible, apparently, for the great experiment. She decides to hold a ball, and she tries to get Princess Augusta to okay it. Well, Augusta's not sure about it. So before Augusta can say no, because Augusta's got to confer with Lord Bute, who seems to be like the real king going on. He's the one that's always in charge, apparently. Agatha decides to go ahead and send the invitations. And she gets Charlotte really excited about it. And now Charlotte and George are together. They're feeling great. So George agrees to go with Charlotte to Agatha's ball. It's beautiful. This is the first time we hear Lord Ledger's name mentioned. I actually love that this chapter where we're at the ball is written from Charlotte and George's perspective, which was really cool because we get to see how in love they're feeling, and they decide that every year Agatha's going to be the one to throw the first ball, which I thought was really cool. You also get to see more of the sweetness between Charlotte and George, which I thought was great. Also, side note, as Agatha is trying to convince the other ladies to go to her ball, this was before she knew Charlotte and George were going to go, and then of course once they go, everybody's going to go. All of the ladies in waiting are at Charlotte's house, and she is entertaining Mozart as a child who's playing. In the show, we actually get to see little Mozart on his little piano. Actually, it's probably an appropriately sized piano. We don't really see that here, but it is mentioned that Charlotte wants Mozart to play, so that's kind of cool. So anyway, they have a great ball, they're feeling good, and George is famished. In the middle of the night, he goes down to the kitchen, and who is in the kitchen in the middle of the night with nobody else around but Dr. Monroe. And we find out that Dr. Monroe is now Charlotte's doctor because Charlotte is pregnant. And Dr. Monroe is even creepier in the book than he was in the show, because yes, in the show he's like, yes, I'm sure. She wasn't sure she's pregnant, but I'm sure. And it's like, ew. And then it gets even worse. We know that he's making a poultice. They also mention that in the show. But in the book he goes, I'm making a poultice and we're going to put it on her. Well, never mind. I'm like, oh, yuck. No, thank you. Stop talking. Moving along. Well, unfortunately, this really upsets George. And it's funny, when I saw the show, I got the impression that he was talking about the stars and the moons and that type of thing to help regulate himself. Based on some of the experience I've seen with other people with other things going on. When they get upset, there are certain things they can think about or do that help regulate them and keep them from getting overly agitated. So that's sort of what I was thinking was happening with George. And then once I started to understand better, I thought, well, maybe that's just him talking about stars because that's just where his brain goes. I am not a medical doctor. I don't know. But it was interesting because it's almost like that's sort of what happened. Like he was thinking about Dr. Monroe, the chair, and his wife, and it was thinking of all these things together was really upsetting for him. So then he started to actively try to think about farming and the solar system. And unfortunately, though, then his brain just got carried away. So he was trying to regulate himself a little bit by thinking about things that were a little bit more comforting for him. Charlotte sees him. Reynolds comes out too. George is being called by Venus, he believes. And in fact, George calls her Venus first in the book. In the show, Charlotte refers to herself as Venus. She says, let's go inside. And she and Reynolds have a really big talk after this when poor George, I mean, he's naked, he's in a blanket, it. He's still mumbling to himself. She has a heart-to-heart with him just about what is going on, how long it's been going on. Reynolds continues to play things close to the vest. He says it's been many years. I've just been trying to do what I can for him. This makes me sad, and it makes me think again, let's get the author Chloe Leese in here, who's gonna come in and say, all right, we're gonna love this whole person as a whole, and we're gonna help them and give them the best support they can, and we're just gonna love every inch of them, because people are worth love no matter what. Charlotte is saying, and I guess it's understandable because she's just learning about this, she's wondering which parts of George are her George and what percentage of George is her George, because she feels like he's just been presenting his best side to her, which I'm sure he has, but she just wonders how much of him is even that person. So kind of sad, but understandable. So then she goes to confront Princess Augusta and says, you guys have known about this. You've known that he's not been in his right mind. You still brought me over here. You still had me marry him. Then Augusta says one of the coldest things I've heard. Charlotte says, you fed me a lie. And Augusta says, yes, and you ate it up willingly. Well, what else was she supposed to do? I don't know. It's crazy. Something else huge happens. Agatha's husband passes away while they're in the act. She, again, just like in the show, feigns sadness. She and Coral actually do a little happy dance. They have a little mini dance party before putting on a show for the rest of the servants. From then on, she is thrilled, yet kind of lost, because since she was 3 years old, she's been raised to be Lord Danbury's wife. So she doesn't really know what to do now when she's not breathing in the air that he exhales. Very fascinating. So she's trying to find her footing, but then also gets in touch with Lord Smythe-Smith, as well as other members of their society, and they say, look, we got to find out, is your son going to inherit the title of Lord Danbury? If not, this great experiment is going to be a huge disaster. We need to know that it passes down the line. So right now, Agatha is trying to work her magic with Princess Augusta, trying to make things happen. Lord Bute's not having it. We're going to see what happens soon. Can't wait to see. All right, so as we resume with the book, George is at Kew under the care of Dr. Monroe. It gets ickier though. Princess Augusta comes with Lord Bute and a physician to examine Charlotte to make sure she is truly with child. She begs Brimsley, Charlotte, to stay in the room with her because she needs an ally, honestly, but it's awkward and Brimsley turns the other way. So speaking of Brimsley, let's talk a little bit more about him and Reynolds. There's a lot more, I feel like, to their relationship. We're seeing a lot more of Reynolds and Brimsley in this book as opposed to the show. You realize that Reynolds, and maybe you realize this in the show too, but you really get a sense that Reynolds is between a rock and a hard place. He's got his loyalties to the king and he has his loyalties to Brimsley, but the king has to win out. And Brimsley has to accept that because Reynolds is not going to give Brimsley any information that he's not supposed to. He is not going to advise Brimsley as to what to do, especially when Charlotte gets fed up and decides to write to her brother Adolphus to take her home. Reynolds is just not willing to bend. He has integrity. He wants to be there for the king. And in fact, we learned that he and the king were boyhood friends. They both knew secrets about the other. So they kept each other's secrets. And for the longest time, Reynolds was the only one who knew about George's episodes, which I find really fascinating. I tell you, I get more respect for Reynolds all the time. And here's a bombshell that I don't remember from the show at all. We find out that it is believed that they chose Charlotte because she would be so grateful to have been chosen that she would overlook the fact that George had issues. How about that? So Adolphus comes to visit Charlotte. She says she wants to go home. He says absolutely not. And he starts to get a sense that things are really not going well because George is not there. But Augusta tries to put up a brave face. Adolphus is like, okay. He then goes to rescue Charlotte later on when she goes to Agatha's. Charlotte is determined, after Brimsley's advice, to go somewhere else. Charlotte is determined to try to move in with Agatha. And Agatha's like, oh no. And Agatha feels badly. This is really interesting. This is not something we got in the show. Agatha feels badly. Upon seeing the Queen really relying on her, trying to act like, with Charlotte leaning on her and acting like she's such a good friend, Agatha feels a lot of guilt. And in her mind, Agatha is reflecting on the fact that she sold the secrets of Charlotte to the Queen for favors, all kinds of favors, and that she betrayed her trust at every turn. This is what Agatha is thinking. So it's true. I wondered what Agatha's mindset was in terms of how she felt about Charlotte. And up to this point, Agatha did not see Charlotte as a friend. But now she's feeling guilty and she's thinking, you know what, I do need to be a good friend to her. So after Charlotte confides everything in Agatha, Charlotte asks Agatha, is there anything that I can do for you? And Agatha says no. Despite the fact that the great experiment is in the balance, Agatha doesn't know if her son will inherit the title. And Charlotte could make that happen. But Agatha has felt so guilty about betraying Charlotte that she asks for nothing else from her. So Charlotte goes to Kew to rescue George. It is much worse in the book than it is in the show. George has lost a ton of weight. He's got bruises and burn marks all over his body. He's just a mess. He throws himself on her. She can't even keep herself upright. She doesn't fall over, but almost. And they all try to help, but she's there just saying, you know, it's me, it's Venus. And she's like, forget it. It's Charlotte. I do remember that from the show. She is like, we're gonna fix this. My love for him will fix this. And of course, Reynolds is like, I don't know if your love for him can completely fix this. Charlotte dismisses Monroe. Monroe gets really angry. They haul him off. And then she comes to see George. He's more calm because he's eating a meal of actual food and he's not freezing and no one's poking him with anything. And he tells her, he's like, you shouldn't be here. This is dangerous. And she's like, do you love me or not? Because that's the only important question. And I feel like maybe that's not the only important question, but for the purposes of the romance, you know, I guess that is the most important question. She decides to stay. I mean, the two of them have a battle of wills. It's king versus queen. Who will win? Charlotte. Charlotte will win. We cut from that to a really sweet scene of Brimsley and Reynolds. They're afraid to hope that everything will work out, and that George will be fine, and that Charlotte and George will be able to live together forever. Because if George and Charlotte can make this work, then Brimsley and Reynolds can be together forever, which they're afraid to hope for. So it just breaks your heart. Brimsley and Charlotte are ready to throw all caution to the wind and just say, it's going to be happily ever after from here on out. Is it though? Let's read on and find out. Well, I just finished the book. Man, emotional again. Everyone's talking about George. There's rumors abounding about if he's unfit. Parliament is concerned. Agatha and Augusta have tea. Actually, a lot of the last portion of this book is Agatha and Augusta just strategizing, planning. That's what Agatha seems to be best at. Augusta wants information. Agatha wants her son, Dominic, to inherit the title. It's a showdown to see who's going to do what. It seems like Lord Bute is really the one in charge here. Augusta also spends some time with Adolphus, Charlotte's brother, and he lets her know that he is interested. And as she's talking later to Coral, she says she thinks she's going to marry Adolphus because he has a title, her family will be well suited, and he seems great. So it looks like it could be a done deal. George and Charlotte continue to do well together. She's hoping that the episodes are over. Obviously, Reynolds doesn't believe that. She's come to notice when there seems to be like an impending episode. She notices the shaky hands, the way that he talks, so she's able to sort of head it off at the pass by comforting him. In fact, she tries to keep all the stress at bay. For example, keeping Augusta away when she tries to see George, but Augusta is there to tell him he needs to address Parliament. He needs to put everyone's fears at ease. And unfortunately, once he does go to Parliament, he, as Reynolds describes it, shrinks into himself in the carriage and is unable to even exit the carriage. Now, in the show, we see this happen in real time, but in the book, Reynolds is the one doing the telling. And it actually, for me, it was almost more powerful because, again, you know how I love Reynolds. He shows the first bit of real raw emotion that we see. Reynolds is very calculating. He's very careful. He's very conservative. All the C's. But when it comes to George, he can be very emotional. He actually yells at Charlotte and Brimsley as he's describing what was going on with poor George, who had no support on his way in the carriage to Parliament and just began imploding. Reynolds actually pretended that the door was stuck and that he couldn't get the door of the carriage unstuck. And then they say something about he was ill and he wasn't able to give a speech. Not only that, as Reynolds is telling it, he starts to get choked up and almost cries, which is like, wow, we have never seen that kind of emotion from Reynolds. Very powerful. By the way, around the same time, something else huge happens. Charlotte has her baby. Agatha is even more present than she was. Was she in the room in the show? I think she was, but she's very present there. She gets George to come in. The two of them working together, telling the doctor what to do, actually saves Charlotte's life. She almost dies in childbirth. You sort of see that in the show, that it's dangerous, but you don't get the sense that it's as dangerous as it is in the book. And just like in the show, Augusta and George have a little conversation while she's holding or looking at her grandson, and she says, how's he doing? You know, as in, how's his mental state? Because you can totally tell that from a newborn. And George says he's perfection. Now, in the show, I loved how Augusta said he is perfect, or something to that effect. But in the book, George states he's perfect, end of chapter. End scene. So we never know what Augusta feels about that. So after Charlotte and Brimsley hear that the king was unable to give his speech, Charlotte goes to look for him. She finds him under the bed. This is where it gets emotional. And, you know, later on at the end of the book, same thing, under the bed. She asks him to come out from under the bed, and he is not able to because the heavens can't find him while he's under the bed. So she goes under there with him, which I thought was so beautiful. And they have a really gorgeous, intimate talk. Much of this is word for word the same in the book and the show. He talks about how he can only give her half a life, and she goes, well, if we're only going to get half, we'll make it the best half. I love that sentiment. So back to Agatha. Adolphus proposes. Agatha winds up saying no, and she actually feels really proud of herself afterwards because she finally feels like she's her own person now. So even though she's a little sad, she feels very powerful, maybe for the first time in her life. Then we have the ball. Everyone is invited. This is the ball at the home of the king. They're trying to keep the rumors at bay, so they have everybody over. George is very, very nervous, and Charlotte helps him. You really see how she's going to be able to carry the king in their relationship going forward. She's got this. She's so young. It's amazing how much she's matured in the course of this book and how much her love for him has helped her, I think, to mature. Then one of my favorite scenes at all from the show, but here's with a twist in the book. George and Charlotte go off to dance on their own, and who do they see dancing also on their own? Reynolds and Brimsley. And Charlotte is so surprised. She's like, did you know? And George goes, well, I know that he fancied men, but I didn't know Brimsley. And George and Charlotte watch Brimsley and Reynolds and see how happy they are. And it was so cute seeing it kind of from that perspective. I wish they had done that in the show. That would have been really cute. But I wouldn't want anything to take away from Brimsley and Reynolds' special moment. It actually wasn't sad either because, again, this is only set in one time period, so we didn't have to cut to Brimsley dancing alone like he did in the show in the future. It was sad. After the ball, Charlotte comes and finds Agatha. Charlotte expresses regrets that Agatha's not going to get married, but she says, I know what I can do for you. I have heard that there is concern about the great experiment. Well, the great experiment is no longer an experiment. It is a fact, and it is great, as Agatha says later on in her mind. Charlotte is making sure that the title will continue, will go down to the son, Dominic. He will be Lord Danbury. So Agatha's fears are put to rest. Pretty impressive that she was willing to say no to Adolphus, even when she didn't know what was going to happen with the inheritance of the title. Just shows how strong a person Agatha is. Finally, now at the very end of the book, we jump 56 years in the future. Charlotte Charlotte has news for her husband. It's very sad. She talks about how he's not there most of the time, how she used to be able to understand him, but now he's mostly just saying gibberish and he's a ghost of himself, just waiting to die. Could this be more depressing? She rarely sees him because it's just too painful, and sometimes he has outbursts, and she goes to see him to give him fabulous news under the bed because that's where it seems like they can best connect. She lets him know that their son Edward is married and there is a baby on the way. George is looking at her and making great eye contact. He even kisses her, and he's just so happy to see her. And you just know that those moments are so few and far between. It just breaks your heart. And as they said in the show, and it seems like to be one of the things that resonates most with people, he said, "You didn't go over the wall." And she said, "I didn't go over the wall." So she stayed with him and she was true to him for the rest of their lives, which was beautiful, but also sad. So I would say, looking back at this, I would give this book on its own a 3 out of 5 because for me, the torture was hard to sit through. There wasn't quite as much romance. The ending, it is a beautiful love that they share, absolutely, but it's bittersweet. And I like my love a little more sweet in books. So also a lot about politics. I mean, in terms of like historical fiction, I would say 5 out of 5, especially because it has all that romance in it. But as far as a historical romance goes, I would probably say 3 out of 5. I will also be doing a 3-minute review for this for those people who do not want to sit through an entire vlog. I don't blame them. And coming up, I'm going to be doing a which one is better, the book or the show. So stay tuned for that. That is it for me. This vlog has gone on long enough. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're enjoying whatever it is that you're reading. Until next time, thanks so much. Take care. Bye.